GNC has the weight loss solutions you've been looking for, with no prescriptions, no sky-high costs, and no hassle. Hunger-satisfying, high-protein Total Lean Shake 25 can help you feel fuller longer. And SlimVance XP is clinically shown to help you shed pounds fast. See results in just 2 weeks. Try one or try them together. Start your weight loss journey today by visiting your local GNC. Or just pick up your phone and go to gnc.com. We're here to help you lose weight. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Shake up your day with the new Starbucks Iced Hazelnut Oat Milk Shaken Espresso. Layers of smooth blonde espresso, rich hazelnut, and creamy oat milk, shaken to delicious perfection. Order yours with the Starbucks app.
Introducing the second best buffalo thing, Cheetos Crunchy Buffalo. Nothing beats buffalo wings on game day, but with a tangy and cheesy buffalo flavor, Cheetos Crunchy Buffalo is proud to be the second best buffalo thing. Grab Cheetos Crunchy Buffalo today.
TaxAct can think of a million things more fun than filing taxes. TaxAct is going to name some now. Sitting in traffic. Folding a fitted bedsheet. Listening to your coworker talk about his fantasy team. Digging a hole. Digging an even larger hole next to that original hole. Unfortunately, TaxAct's filing software can't make taxes fun. But TaxAct can help you get them done. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.
Hey parents, Greenlight is here to take one big thing off your to-do list, teaching your kids about money. With a Greenlight debit card and money app of their own, kids and teens learn to earn, save, and invest. You can send money instantly, set flexible controls, and get real-time notifications of your kids' money activity. Set up chores and put allowance on autopilot to reward them for their hard work. Then learn about the world of money together. Get 1 month free when you sign up at greenlight.com/podcast.
Welcome to Haunting History, the podcast that reaches back into the past for the events that still haunt us today. Tales of true crime, mystery, and the macabre. And when we're lucky, the stories were history and the people who lived it and the paranormal meet. Now, who doesn't love a good ghost story, right? Welcome back to Haunting History Podcast. I'm your host, Kat. Haley is not here today, but I have Jacob Caputo from Haunted Whittier, who I've lived in California my entire life. I've probably been to Whittier twice in that entire time, and I had no idea. I was going online, and I had no idea there were so many cool stories about Whittier.
Yeah, we are a great town. We have a long history. It's actually a lot longer than most people realize. Obviously, we had Native Americans living where we live now. They were called the Tongva. Around about the 18th century, the Spaniards start showing up. One man in particular, Nieto, he was a soldier from San Diego, or was from Mexico, but he had lived in San Diego for a while. He came up here, he received a land grant, he lived here for many years, and he kind of was the start of what became Whittier. Later, after the Mexican War, California becomes part of the United States. A lot of the land, which is where Whittier sits now, was owned by a Mexican gentleman by the name of Pio Pico. He sold off a lot of that land to the Quakers, who were starting to show up here after the American Civil War. And they settled here and named the town after a Quaker who was an abolitionist by the name of John Greenleaf Whittier. He never actually visited our town, but he was very touched that the town was named after him. And all these years later, we're here living in this town, and it's a wonderful place.
That's what I learned last night when I was watching I was trying to find out as much history as I could about Whittier. And I didn't know it originally started as a Quaker town.
Yeah, it very much was.
Right? They didn't do well for whatever reason. The train had not come through yet.
Well, they had a lot of problems living in this area. One of the things that it may even come as a surprise, even the Tongva Indians never stuck around the Whittier area particularly long. And the reason why was there just wasn't enough water here. They needed to be where water was. And so they would come during the rainy seasons when it was available, then they would leave. And so when the Quakers settled here, they had that exact same problem. And you're right, the railroad wasn't here yet, and that contributed. Eventually, they built a flume to bring water in. And they also purchased water rights in some other places and brought water in. And then the town flourished, but it was a struggle. They worked very, very hard.
And what year was that? What year was it? I mean, the Quakers were 1858, I thought it was.
They start showing up in small numbers in the 1850s. After the Civil War, more show up. It's really, the town doesn't get established until the 1880s, 1887. But, it was they were here before the town actually became incorporated. So it took a little while, but they worked very hard. If you look at those early photos, this was kind of the Wild West out here. There wasn't a lot.
And your tour, is it a walking tour of Whittier?
It is a walking tour. I have two different tours. One of them, probably the more popular of the two, we start in Central Park, which is the original Central Park Whittier. And it's got some great history into itself. We start at the John Greenleaf Whittier statue, and then we take a walk into the historical district.
Okay, and this park, is that the park that's called Dead Man's Park?
It is not.
Okay, that's another park.
That is another park. We talk about that on my tour. That is our original cemetery. But Central Park actually was at one point owned by Pio Pico himself. It passed into the hands of a guy by the name of John Barclay, who eventually, Charles Barclay was his name. And he sold the land to the city, and they developed it into the park that it is today, way back in the 1890s. And it's kind of cool that it's that old. And we have pictures of people having parties, Quakers having parties there in the 1890s and early 1900s. And it's kind of cool that it's still really relatively unchanged.
So there is a historic, so I'm not familiar. Obviously, I've been to Whittier twice. There's an actual historic district. Is it stores? Is it houses?
It's actually mostly houses, believe it or not. We had on Greenleaf, that's the main street that was laid out way back in the 1880s. We had a very nice historical district there, and we would still have it today if it wasn't for the Whittier earthquake. I mean, it's still there, but a lot of the original buildings that were from the early 1900s, the late 1800s, were really, really badly damaged. Many of them had to be razed. They built with brick back then, and they just didn't hold up. The historical district itself came into being due to the Whittier earthquake. Many of those houses were torn down because of the earthquake, and the city realized it wasn't going to be long before all of them were gone. So they protected that area, and now those homes, they have to be refurbished to period specifications. And so they are being preserved, thankfully.
So your whole tour is based on mostly homes, not actual businesses?
That's true. We my second tour that we started in a restaurant that's on Greenleaf that actually is from the 1920s. It is haunted, and we do stop in a couple of the stores, but we stop in front of a lot of homes when we go into the historical district that have some very long history and obviously hauntings.
How do the homeowners feel about your tour?
I have to say, we're known to be a friendly city. People that live in the historical district, they live there because they have a passion for history, and they actually do enjoy sharing their homes and letting people see them just because they know that they're special. There's a few people on my tour that they know the stories, they've heard of the hauntings, some of them don't believe in them, but they do see them. That is a important part of our folklore. And so they're happy that those things are being preserved. Other ones do, in fact, believe in the ghost stories and have shared with me some great things and have allowed me to, hear more stories and, obviously increase the add to the tour. So I'm very grateful to what they provide.
So I don't want you to give a lot of your tour away because I want people to actually go on it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about other places in Whittier that are supposedly haunted?
Well, yeah, I'm more than happy to do so. We are a very old town. There's a lot of different areas around our town that, some spirits have stuck around. We have a lot of very old buildings.
Can I ask about one specifically?
Yeah, I'm gonna tell you about one right now.
Okay.
One of my favorite ones is an old antique shop, but that's not what it is. It's actually an old orange packing warehouse that was later turned into an antique shop. And we do know that a number of people were, in fact, killed there when it was an orange warehouse. Obviously, there's going to be industrial accidents, right? So we do know that there were some lives lost, and people that work in there have a lot of very interesting experiences. I've interviewed a number of the employees, and one of them in particular, the comment that I got from them was just wonderful. And it was, if you don't believe in ghosts, work here for a couple of weeks and you will. And they oftentimes will hear their names being called. The basement, they say, is particularly spooky. I've been down there. It is cold when it shouldn't be, even in the summertime. Sometimes you hear voices. There's an area where we know that one of the workers was killed. Some of the employees tell me that you will feel cold hands on your shoulders.
Killed how? How killed?
Well, it's actually a very sad story. When you go in there and if you look up, you can see where the old freight elevator used to come down, and they boarded it up, but the square where it once was is still there. And apparently he was standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. This is back in the 1920s. Somebody wasn't paying attention, and some machinery was pushed over the edge where the freight elevator was supposed to come down. He was standing there and his head was crouched. So you can kind of understand why he might be interested in pushing people out of the way.
Wow. And this is a antique store that's still open?
Yeah, you can go visit it. You can go there right now if you want. It's called King Richard's Antiques.
I'm going to go.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell me about the boys' school.
Oh, you've heard about Fred Sinell's.
Well, that I completely got sucked into that last night. I was doing history, and then something came up about that, and then I sucked in.
Well, it's a shame that, I have mixed feelings about it because it had been closed for many, many years. There are some very special historical buildings there, but it was a prison. And I mean, what were you going to do with all of this land? And, you can't just preserve everything. So when they developed, they tore down a lot of the prison and they developed it. However, many of the buildings were preserved, and they use them for various things now in that neighborhood. One of them is a pool house and where the old commandant used to be. But there's a lot of, I've interviewed a lot of the residents that live over there, and they say, it's a spooky place, even though they're brand new houses. I actually, some of the people on my tour that live over there they hear voices in their house at night, whispering. I guess lights are constantly turning on and off by themselves. One woman shared with me, she looked out her window, and this was actually an interesting story because I had heard this from somebody that used to work there when it was Fred Sinell's. And this woman looked out the window and saw basically a couple of kids in cadet uniforms, probably from the 1930s or 40s, marching in formation, and then they just vanished. And we actually have pictures of them doing that back in that era. They wore uniforms back then. And, so I'm hearing it from a couple of different people now that have no connection to one another. So I think there's something to it. I mean, it was a horrible place, It
was. I was going to say, it was, ideally, it started out for a good reason.
Oh, yeah.
That there was a need for kids that were kind of wayward and needed help. And then just how do you contain that many kids that are problem kids? They had grandiose ideas about, it's just so crazy because they even showed at one point that the really bad kids, so the violent ones, would, people were saying that they still needed to be educated just because they were violent. They still needed to have an education. They would put them in, I would call them a porta potty with bars. It literally, they were like literally the size of a porta potty.
Yeah.
But they were like, it was a cage.
Basically.
And they would teach a line of them math and science. And it was like, I can't even imagine how many bad feelings are built up in some of those buildings that are.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, certainly that, but there were murders there. There were suicides.
There were a lot of suicides.
There were quite a few actually. You don't need to work very hard to find them. You can find them in old reports of them in old newspapers. It happened with some frequency. It was a rough place. It was a sad place. Those were kids that didn't really have a lot of options. And I actually ran across a woman that worked there as a secretary, and the office that she was in, she could see cameras and she could see hallways and whatnot. She said that she had cameras places where she knew nobody ever was. And she would see, the figures walking up and down. Doors would open by themselves and then deliberately close. She said it was an extremely spooky place to work. And she said, you didn't want to be there at night. And oftentimes she was. And, everybody that worked there had experiences. And with what you're saying, absolutely. Stuff stuck around.
Yeah. Yeah. That there has to be a residue left.
Yeah.
Now, I heard there's a college in Whittier that was haunted also.
Oh, Whittier College?
Yeah.
Yeah, Whittier College. I've interviewed a number of people that have gone to Whittier College that have had some experiences. Going back to the Spanish flu epidemic, Whittier didn't have the hospital capacity. So they used some of the dormitories as infirmaries. And so, how many people died, I couldn't tell you, but it would have been, a number of people would have lost their lives there. One of the spookiest stories that I ever got from a girl that was in one of those dorms, she was taking a shower and she heard the door open as if somebody had come in, and she knew she was kind of by herself, but she kind of wanted to know who had come in. So she poked her head out just a little bit behind the curtain. Nobody was there. She called out, hey, is anybody there? Nobody answered. So she went back to taking her shower. And so you got to picture this, she's taking a shower by herself. This is obviously a moment where she's vulnerable. And she suddenly felt a presence very close, and she turned to look, and a hand was the outline of a hand coming through the curtain, and it was reaching out for her. And she screamed, and she felt like something trying to grab her. And
wow.
She quickly ran out of the shower, put her towel around her, and decided never, ever to take a shower in that room by herself again. And she mentioned it to some of the other girls that lived in that area, and they all said, yeah, don't ever be in there by yourself. There's a presence there of some kind. The theory is that it was one of the people that died from the Spanish flu, because in that building was where they had been kept.
That's so funny. I've heard so many stories years ago. I mean, I can't even tell you how long ago. Someone was talking about haunted locations in California, and someone mentioned Whittier College, and I never really thought about it again until you and I started talking. And I was like, oh wait, and I never looked it up. It just has struck me just now that Whittier College is one of the ones that I'd heard about. What about Turnbull Canyon?
Well, you know about Turnbull Canyon.
I don't know anything. I just know that I've heard that it was haunted. I literally did my research in the last 2 days.
And
I heard a lot about Turnbull Canyon.
So I'm gonna give you a lot here if you have the time for it.
We'll take it.
Turnbull Canyon has become somewhat controversial in the last few years, because what many of us, and I'm a longtime Whittier resident, I'm third generation, so I've got pretty deep roots in the community. Keep in mind, I am child of the 80s, so we didn't have the internet back then. I grew up believing some of the most horrible things about Turnbull Canyon that you could imagine. We all believed it was haunted. We all believed that there was an insane asylum that had existed back there, and that they had performed lobotomies and done horrible things. We all had heard various stories about murders that had taken place back there, devil worship, and there's a few other things as well. And in more recent years, there's been a couple of people that have really kind of done some deep dives into the history of the area and kind of tried to figure out, what is actually going on back there. And a lot of them kind of scoff at the haunted history, and they say, well, there's no reason for it to be haunted. There was no insane asylum back there. Well, let's kind of back up and look at what Turnbull Canyon actually was. Back in the early 1900s and well into the 1940s, there were oil rigs back there, and there were a lot of them. And it was oil land. There was quite a bit of it there. And so there would have been roughnecks that were working very hard. And now keep in mind, in that era, safety protocols were not what they are today.
Non-existent.
Exactly. So those men were under a lot of stress, and certainly, with what they were doing, that's dangerous, big machinery. We know a lot of them died. We know that there were fires on the rigs. We know that, I've even read, Whittier Daily newspapers from like the 20s. Somebody worked out there on a rig by themselves, and then there was, the dry grass caught fire. horribly blistered. Maybe he was saved. Whether he died or not, they made it to the hospital, but he's horribly burned. There certainly was a lot of death back in that canyon. So I think that the place developed a reputation early on because of what had happened there. Because it wasn't like they were murdering anybody, but it was hard work of the era, and people died in that canyon. So I think a reputation, that's where it started. The place is also very remote. If you grew up there in the 80s or 90s, there wasn't any lights back there. There were very few houses. So you drive around the corner, it gets pitch black. There were murders that took place there. There was an unfortunate Whittier High School student that was murdered there in the 70s, and he's been seen walking in jeans and a t-shirt. People look in their rearview mirror and they see him, and then they turn around, there's nobody there. I actually interviewed one of his friends, and it very much did happen. It's in the newspapers. There was more recent murder back there. There's been some bodies that have been dumped back there. So there's all kinds of reasons for the place to be haunted.
Not just necessarily an insane asylum.
But let me tell you about the insane asylum, because I did a real deep dive into that. Because, like I said, it is very much part of Whittier folklore. I grew up believing it. There were all the kids in high school. Some of them even claimed that, oh yeah, my great aunt was a nurse there. Or, oh yeah, my grandpa was friends with a doctor there. He did the lobotomies, and you keep hearing these stories growing up, and there was no Google to go look up what actually happened back there. And so I always kind of wondered, why on earth is this so part of Whittier folklore? There's got to be something to it. Well, I've got two theories on it. I did find that the family that owns Rose Hills, which is very, it's a cemetery, which is very close to Turnbull Canyon. They at one point opened a very small, and they called it a sanitarium. But in those days, this wasn't for people that were, insane or, had depression or something like that, or needed to be committed. This was just a place to go if you had a lot of stresses in your life, you needed to go on vacation somewhere, kind of sit back and relax. Early 1900s, it was known to be kind of a lot of women would say, it was fashionable to say that they had a nervous breakdown, believe it or not. And they would go and rest and relax there. So that may be kind of the startings of it. But what my theory is, I think that people have connected Turnbull Canyon to the old Murphy Hospital. And have you heard of Murphy Hospital?
No, I haven't heard of that. Yeah,
Murphy Hospital used to be in Uptown Whittier. It's been long since torn down. Operated in the early 1900s. It was considered, it was a huge behemoth of a building. If you had looked at it, you would kind of think of it as one of those old-fashioned asylums, because it kind of looks like that, but it's long gone. But I think that it's in people's memories. And doing some interviews with some people around the community, I found out from a police officer that back in the early 1900s, when they had bodies that were not claimed, they were burying them down on Hadley in an old avocado orchard. The farmer was actually taking money from Murphy Hospital and burying them there. And this police officer, the reason he knew about it was because he had gone to calls from people that dug up bodies in their backyard.
Oh, no.
This is in the 70s. So many, many years later, somebody's doing a little gardening and they break into this old rotting box and they look down and there's a grinning skull.
Oh, no. And this is in Turnbull Canyon?
No, this is on Hadley. So this is not anywhere near Turnbull Canyon. But
okay.
What I think is that somehow the lore of Turnbull Canyon kind of turned to kind of connect to Murphy Hospital, because that kind of makes sense. How folklore kind of becomes better with every telling. I recently had a discussion with the curator of the Whittier Museum about this.
Which is going to be our next topic.
Oh, okay, great. And we kind of discussed that a little bit. And he said, the Murphy Hospital was they wanted to project to the community that they were, keep in mind when the hospital was built, we were still kind of the Wild West. It's early 1900s. But they wanted to project to the community that they were as modern as possible, that they were up on the latest treatments. And, they probably didn't want anybody to know that they were burying bodies in the community. And because I asked you have any proof of this? Have you seen any documentation about this? And his comment to me was none. People don't write things down, or sometimes it doesn't survive. And so we'll probably never know all of the story. But from my understanding, though, that doing that with unclaimed bodies in that era was not uncommon.
No. I mean, I do my family history, and I've found so many times in the 1800s, especially, where they just buried grandma in the,
In the
back
backyard.
40.
Yeah.
And it's still there, and someone else owns the property, and they know they're there. But
Yeah.
I'm sure it did happen. But it's funny because almost every community has a canyon. There's Black Star Canyon,
Mm-hmm.
there's the Brea Canyon,
Yep.
and like you always have all these crazy stories. But I've never in the two canyons that I know of, that where I grew up, there was never talk about an insane asylum.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there's always some kind of story, but
Yeah.
it always has a tiny bit of truth. So I wouldn't be surprised if either the Murphy Hospital combined and made that story, or I would think it's more that sanitarium. If the sanitarium was near the cemetery and people hear the word sanitarium, they think asylum. So there is a grain of truth. It's probably not even close to what the legend became.
There's something there, because stories like that don't survive without some grain of truth.
Right.
I'm going to tell you a quick story about Turnbull Canyon, and I'm going to make it very clear before I even tell you it's not true. But I grew up believing it. I heard it in high school. Other friends, my uncle, he heard it when he was a kid. And it'll make you laugh because it's a story you probably heard other places. And it's just about two lovers from Whittier College. They drive into Turnbull Canyon to be alone, to be together. And when the boyfriend tries to start his car won't start. And he turns to his girlfriend and said, "Look, I'm going to go walk back and get some help. I'll leave you here." Which, that part of the story doesn't even make sense. But he leaves her. And, pretty soon she hears these odd scratching on the top of the car.
Scratching on the car.
Yeah. And she believes that there's a mountain lion up there, because we do have mountain lions back in the canyon. And so she huddles under a blanket and stays there. And he never returns, of course. And the next day, there's a knock on the door of her car, and she kind of looks out. It's a police officer. And as he's pulling her out of the car, he's telling her not to look up. And of course she does. And her boyfriend is hanging from the tree, disemboweled, and the scraping was his feet against the top of the car. Now, when the story is told in Whittier, of course, it is one of the inmates of the asylum that had long since escaped. The asylum had burned down; the inmates had burned it down, and he had been roaming the hills looking for his victims. And it is a wonderful story. I enjoy telling it.
I mean, it's a great story when you're in high school and you get your friends all in one car and
drive Turnbull Canyon, tell that story. It's and I enjoy telling it because I love that the folklore has survived, and there's of course no grain of truth in it. But why is it interesting to us? Why do we continue to relate
tell
to
the story?
Yeah.
Well, because I mean, again, my tagline is "Who doesn't love a good ghost story?"
Absolutely,
it's just how it is.
Absolutely.
Okay, tell us about Whittier Mansion.
Whittier Mansion.
Which
Whittier Mansion? Whittier Mansion.
All I hear all the time is Whittier Mansion is haunted.
Are you talking about the Whittier Museum?
Oh, there you go.
Pio Pico.
Sorry,
or are you referring to Pio Pico's house? The Pio Pico
I've
Mansion.
never heard of Pio Pico's house, so it must be the Whittier Museum.
Yeah, Pio Pico his house is still in Whittier. We call it Pio Pico's mansion. So, but Whittier Museum is they're actually, that one's haunted as well. But if you want to hear both stories, I can tell you.
Yeah, I do.
So Pio Pico's mansion is an interesting story because it's a sad one. Near the end of his life, I need to back up. When sovereignty was passed from Mexico to California, Mexican residents were in fact given citizenship if they wanted it. And Pio Pico took advantage of that and became a extremely wealthy man. He did very, very well on land speculation and some other things as well. He had cattle, citrus as well. Later in his life, though, he had a gambling problem. and he basically had to sell a lot of his land. And as he got older, his English was never particularly good. He needed a loan, and he accidentally, thinking he was getting a loan, he accidentally signed his holdings, all of his land holdings, over to another party. Basically got cheated out of his land and his money, his fortune. And he actually had to move in with his daughter, and he died virtually penniless. And this is, somebody that had been a very, very significant figure in California history. Now, I interviewed a police officer who told me that they had received a call that it was in the middle of the night, that there was a prowler around Pio Pico's mansion, and could they go check it out? And so they went over there, I guess, and they kind of just were looking. Nothing seemed to be wrong. And he made his way over to I guess his partner went around one side of the building and he went around the other. And he looks and suddenly he saw some movement. So he was very careful to make his way toward that movement. And suddenly he sees a man and the way he described it to me was, Victorian era clothing, this black, maybe a morning coat, standing there. And the guy turned and looked at him and gave him just very, very sad expression, very melancholy. And they stood and looked at each other for just a couple of seconds, and the entity faded away. And he was quite sure that he had seen Pio Pico's ghost. If he is telling the truth, if there is anything to the story, why else would Pio Pico appear in his old house and give such a melancholy look? Well, what happened to the man? He lost his land. He lost his fortune.
So what is going on with that house now? Is it open to the public?
You can go visit it.
Yes, that's nice.
And I hope you will. It's a great piece of California, Mexican, and U.S. history, and it's right here in Whittier.
Okay, so tell us about the Whittier Museum.
So the Whittier Museum, a lot of people that visit it claim that it's haunted. The curator definitely believes that it is. They hear footsteps at night. They have an old Quaker piano that plays on its own. I guess sometimes he's in his office and he knows that everybody's gone home for the day. He's the only one there, and suddenly just the notes start playing on the piano. The one thing that, maybe you could figure that a piano might be able to make some noise, maybe something fell on it or something, but they have a streetcar in there. And this streetcar was part of the old Whittier line, the red car line. I'm sure you're probably familiar with that. And there is a bell on that vehicle. And the only way that bell can be pulled is through a lot of force. You have to really yank on the thing. And it goes off by itself with some frequency. And there's a belief among some people that when items have a importance to somebody's life, maybe a part of them stays with it. And the Whittier Museum is full of a lot of antiques that are from our town that belong to our founders. And so maybe some of them have stuck around and are in the museum.
Now, tell me, first of all, how often are your tours?
Good question. Obviously, in the summer, I run them more frequently, just because there's more interest, because people are just out and about. I try to run in the summertime at least 2 or 3 per month. Once it gets cold, people are not quite as interested. I always tell people that the winter tours are the best because it's cold. I think it makes it more spooky. Right. But during the wintertime, I usually run at least once a month. During October, we do them every Tuesday out of a restaurant on Greenleaf called Modern Shaman. And it's a lot of fun. Just come show up, have dinner. You can, when we're ready to start the tour, the owner will turn on a fog machine and turn the lights low. And the restaurant actually is haunted. There's a spirit that lingers there that a lot of the employees have seen. And so it's a wonderful place for me to start the first couple of stories.
And how do people get tickets?
Just go on either to our Haunted Whittier Facebook or Haunted Whittier Instagram, or you can go to Yelp, Haunted Whittier, and there's a link there to buy tickets. We're sold out for August right now, but I'm going to tell you something secret right now that I haven't really told many people. September 1st is when our tickets will be dropping for the month of October. So definitely log in on September 1st to get some tickets. And if you miss those, don't worry. We'll be doing them in November and into December as well. And can I say something I haven't told anybody yet?
Yeah. Just remember, we're in the we have a lot of listeners.
I know.
So
I'm excited.
Okay.
We are working with the Whittier Museum right now to do a full-on flashlight tour of the museum. And there's going to be some stories that you haven't heard. It's in production right now, but it's one you won't want to miss. I guarantee you, it's a spooky old building. The lights will be off, and maybe we'll see something. Maybe we'll hear some things. Hard to say, but be watching for that. I'll be talking.
And that'll be on your website too?
It will be, and
on your social media.
Yeah, we'll be talking about it on social media when we're closer to doing that. But really excited that the Whittier Museum reached out to me to kind of develop this. Their team has kind of been compiling some stories, just people that have visited the museum, because I don't make stuff up. I want the stories come to me, and we write them down, and they're going to be a lot of fun. So definitely watch out for that.
Okay, and then one last question: what made you get into? I mean, I understand that you're a third generation in Whittier, but what made you get into the haunted side of the history?
That's a good question. I talk about this on my tour, how I kind of view ghost stories. I believe that ghost stories are a great way of teaching history.
Thank you. I swear, I always have these conversations with people like, well, I only do the history. I don't talk about the haunting. And I'm like, they go hand in hand.
They do. And, it's funny because I'm not going to say who said this to me because it was kind of insulting, but I reached out to another local place about, maybe developing a tour with them. And they said, well, we would never lower ourselves to talk about ghost stories.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, you don't have to believe them. You can think they're silly, but what's the lesson? I mean, they preserve history. And, this is the one I kind of tell people. I said, everybody's heard the old man points to the hill and says, hey, don't go over there. That's the old Indian burial ground. We've heard that story. Well, why is that? Even if you don't believe in ghosts, what does that teach? Well, the Indians were here. And maybe the person that hears that goes and looks up, well, what Indians were here? Oh, this was the Tongva. This was their home. And maybe that opens up a whole door of an interest. And I think that's wonderful. That's important.
Right. No, I'm a firm believer that if you dwell enough into history, you're going to run into ghost stories. It's just how it is.
It absolutely is.
And so to deny it is denying a portion of your history. It's still there. It's not going to go away.
Absolutely. And, to go back to kind of how I came up with this, I was a number of years ago, I was in Key West, and they really weren't doing a lot of ghost tours really anywhere back then. My wife was looking for something to do and saw that, they do a ghost tour here. That's interesting. And it was the most fascinating 2 hours I'd ever spent walking around this old town and them telling all these great stories from pirates on down. I mean, all the stuff that had happened in Key West. And it, on the back of my mind, I was like, this could work in Whittier, I bet. We got a great old town. And it just, years go by, and it was always in the back of my mind. And I have to laugh because this is one of the only good things that came out in my life, at least that came out during the lockdowns and COVID. It popped into my mind again, and I had the time. I'm like, I'm going to sit down and figure out how to make this work. And I did.
That's exciting. So it's not even that old yet.
3 years now.
Nice.
And even during COVID, it was a lot of fun because I was running tours, especially in October, almost every night. I was getting calls from parents saying, you do an outdoor activity. We got to get the family out. Like, yeah. Come on out. You can wear masks, social distance and stuff. Just let's get out in the night air and let me tell you stories.
Nice. I'm going to definitely hit up your tour. I'm going to come in November because I know that you're going to be packed through October. I'm not going to even take away from any mid-October. I'll go on a ghost tour Christmas Eve. I don't care.
We Nightmare Before Christmas, right?
Yeah, I don't even care. I don't care what time of year it is. I'll go.
Yeah, they're a lot.
And I love it. I'm excited. You popped up on my Instagram feed, and I was like, what? I've never heard of this. I was so excited. So I'm excited. So I'm going to have on our website, I'm going to have all the information about Jacob and Haunted Whittier. You can go there. You sent me links, right, Jacob?
I did, in fact, yeah.
So there will be links there. You can save the links. And like you said, September 1st, all his October stuff goes on sale. So hit up Haunted Whittier. I know we got people to go to the Haunted Orange tour, and that was so much fun.
Which by the way, they've come on my tour. I've gone on theirs. They're a great group of people, and I agree with you. Great tour.
So you've done the Haunted Orange one?
I have, yeah.
That's my hometown.
Yeah, the Great Orange is wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah, that's where I grew up. I grew up 3 blocks from the historic district.
Yeah. And they've got some stories.
So, yeah.
They definitely got stories.
Yeah, well, now I have to visit Whittier too. Thank you so much for doing this with me.
It's my pleasure.
I'll have all your stuff on our website. Anybody who's listening that wants to go to Whittier, I know we have a lot of California listeners. Hit up Jacob and follow him on Instagram, and I'll share right before your episode comes out too. I'll have it all over our social media too.
Excellent. Well, this was a pleasure.
Thank you. Good night.
You have a good night as well.
Bye. Whether you're a believer in the supernatural or a skeptic searching for answers, Haunted Whittier and its ghost tours offer a unique lens with which to view the world. They remind us that in a world driven by science and reason, there are still mysteries that we don't understand and a past that deserves to be remembered. Thank you for listening to this episode of Haunting History Podcast. We love hearing from you, so be sure to like, follow, and comment on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Haunting History Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to all your favorites.
Visit our website at hauntinghistorypodcast.com for more information on each episode, links to our Patreon page, and all of our social media platforms.
Until next time, I'm Kat.
I'm Haley.
Remember, the living are far scarier than any ghost.
Introducing the second best buffalo thing, Cheetos Crunchy Buffalo. Nothing beats buffalo wings on game day, but with a tangy and cheesy buffalo flavor, Cheetos Crunchy Buffalo is proud to be the second best buffalo thing. Grab Cheetos Crunchy Buffalo today.
TaxAct can think of a million things more fun than filing taxes. TaxAct is going to name some now. Sitting in traffic. Folding a fitted bedsheet. Listening to your coworker talk about his fantasy team. Digging a hole. Digging an even larger hole next to that original hole. Unfortunately, TaxAct's filing software can't make taxes fun. But TaxAct can help you get them done. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.
When it comes to teaching kids and teens about money, practice makes perfect. That's where Greenlight comes in. With a debit card and money app of their own, kids learn to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest. Parents send instant money transfers, create custom chores, and automate allowance, while kids track their spending, set savings goals, and practice money skills they can use today and for life. Get 1 month free when you sign up at greenlight.com/podcast.